12th Armored picnic for today, and I'm interviewing Floyd Vanderhoef from the 56A Company, and my name, the interviewer, is Catherine Lopez. All right, I'd first like to ask you, what was your life like when you were a little child? What were your parents like?
Well, I was born in January 1919 on a farm just north of the Arkansas line in central Missouri, and I spent the next 21 years living on that farm with my folks and my brothers and my sisters. And it was a typical farm life in those days. I guess after I got older, we found out we had a depression, but we didn't know it. Everybody lived alike, and it was a bit meager compared to what we do now. But we lived mostly off of the stuff we got off the farm, and a boy at that time, if he had a pair of overalls, he was in pretty good shape and went barefooted all summer. I have to tell you one little story about that I tell my kids and my grandkids. But one fall, I think it was in October, I had to get up and go get the cows out of the pasture and bring them up to the barn and before breakfast. And I'd get out there about daylight and kick them old cows and make them get up. Then I'd stand where they had been laying down so I could warm my feet. I still going barefooted. Some people don't believe that, but it's the truth. Then I went to high school in West Plains and fortunately made it in 4 years. And then I joined the National Guard at the West Plains National Guard Company at that time, and that was in 1939. And then in late 1940, we were mobilized onto active duty. And at that time, it was to be for 1 year. And before that year was over, Pearl Harbor came along, and our year became the duration plus 6 months. And it turned out to be about 5 years. We were originally stationed down by Little Rock, a little place called Camp Joseph T. Robinson, and we were there until Pearl Harbor. And then within days after Pearl Harbor, we were on a train going to the West Coast. Now, where they got these trains, I don't know, but the passenger cars we had carbide lights on them, and they worked the first night, and the rest of the trip they didn't work. And the train had a 45-mile speed limit. So we took a day or two to get to Fort Ord, 3 or 4 days, I don't remember. And then we went from Fort Ord up to the Presidio of San Francisco for a few days, and then they put us on guard duty on the Southern Pacific Railroad up in Northern California, up near Weed. Weed was one town, Mount Shasta was another town, Dunsmuir was another town in that area, and we were in an old CCC camp that was still habitable. It wasn't too bad. It was colder than the dickens, but we put a guard on each tunnel and each trestle, and we thought it was a bunch of baloney. We didn't think anybody'd be bothering a railroad. And before we left there were people actually trying to blow up the railroad. We didn't get the guy, but we got his dynamite and his pick and shovel and chased him off. So from then on, it got a little serious. And then we were there from probably sometime in January through February until sometime in March. Then someone took our place. I don't remember who it was. And we went back down to Sacramento. Some of us stayed in Sacramento, and some of us went to Camp San Luis Obispo. That would have been that's 42. And after that stay, which was just a month or so, we went clear down to San Diego, and we lived with the Navy down there on North Island Naval Air Base. And we actually put in beach defenses around North Island Naval Air Base to defend in case the Japanese decided to take that air base. And it wasn't exactly an island, but it was mostly an island, and then there was one little causeway where you could get out onto it. But we were there for, till about the 1st of August. These times are not going to jibe exactly, but it's been a while. About the 1st of August, I put in an application to go to Officers Candidate School and was accepted. And there was some 10 or 12 of us from the regiment that I was in at the time, went to Fort Benning, Georgia to OCS, and that was a 13 weeks course at that time. And I came out of there the 16th of November, a second lieutenant. And they give us a 10-day delay en route. And of course, you go home and spend as much time there as you could. And then I went to what was at that time Camp Camel, Kentucky, where the 12th Armored was being activated, which it had been activated about 2 months before I got there. And I got there on Thanksgiving Day. That had been 42. 42? Yeah. And was assigned to C Company of the 56th Regiment at that time. Then I was transferred to G Company of the regiment, and then we reorganized after Tennessee maneuvers, and G Company of the 56th became A Company of the 56th, which is not too important anymore, but that's the reason I identify with A56. I was a platoon leader for, at Camp Camel, Tennessee maneuvers, then at Camp Barkley, Texas. And somewhere along the way, I made first lieutenant, what was on my birthday, my 25th birthday, I guess. It had been 1944. Yeah. And I became the company executive officer, and then I kept that part until through the training at Camp Barkley, and went overseas in September, October then. And we were scheduled to go to France. And actually our advanced party was in France, but somebody changed their mind. We went to England. And we landed at Liverpool. I don't remember the dates. And spent 2 or 3 or 4 weeks maybe in England. Then we drew all new equipment. The only equipment we took with us was our clothes and our individual weapons. And then when we got there, we drew all new vehicles, all new tanks, everything except the individual weapon, machine guns, mortars, artillery, the whole bit. And then at a given time, we were loaded onto various types of ships. I got on an LST with a load of heavy vehicles, and got out just off of Le Havre and had to sit there a day or two so they could clear a beach for us. The beaches that were being used had a higher priority than we had, I guess. And we finally, they run that booger up on the beach and dropped the big front gate down. We drove off, and actually, I was better off than a lot of them were. So some of those guys that got there earlier had lived in a muddy field for 2 or 3 days, and I lived out on the ship with the Navy guys for 2 or 3 days. So when I drove off, I just kept riding. And we got our baptism of fire just before Christmas. Now, there were other units that was in combat before we were. I think the artillery units were engaged before any of the infantry units were, or the tank units. But then our first combat, we had a night attack, which scared me to death. And we took a little hill just out of a town called Etweiler. And that was the first town that we had taken in Germany. And so we had the privilege of taking the first town in Germany, if that's a privilege. And we stayed there for, most of a week. And while we were up on this hill and in the town of Etweiler, some infantry outfit dug a defense behind us. The idea, I understand now, was that they were getting ready to settle down for the winter. And after they got this defense dug in behind us, then we pulled back through them. One moonlight night, I understand. I thought it was dark, but people tell me the moon was shining. But we pulled back through this outfit, and then we went back into a reserve area for a few days. And I got to tell you a story about that one. You don't mind these stories, do you? Okay. We were parked on an artificial lake. There was a little village there that a lot of abandoned houses there around it, so we were in these buildings. And of course, these GIs, there's a lake out there, there's got to be fish in that lake. And there was fishing equipment in a building alongside the lake. So they found some nets and stuff, and they went out and cut holes in the ice, and they tried everything they could think of, but they couldn't catch any fish. So somebody got to wandering around, and the spillway was not frozen. It was still running water. Well, the spillway was not frozen. And somebody looked down in this pool below the spillway, and there was dozens and dozens of fish right down in that hole. So they got the nets out, and they couldn't catch them in the nets there because without getting in the cold water. So some genius got the idea that you could use a concussion grenade, and boy, them fish come right to the top. And you take the nets in and sweep them up. And we had fresh fish. I have pictures of those at home. I wish I had them with me. But anyhow, that was one of the things that anytime something was around and people had time, they're going to figure out some way of getting something done they want to do. And it happened time after time. And then after that, we went to what I guess is our famous Herlesheim. And I was still the exec of A Company. And on the evening of the 8th of January, somebody got a hold of me and said, Captain Beach in B Company has been wounded, and you're going to go up and take over as company commander of B Company. And I said, boy, oh boy, oh boy, what am I getting into? Because I hadn't been a company commander before, except just for short little periods of time here and there when somebody was on leave. So I go up, and this whole company is in the water mill that's mentioned many times. And there were other companies in this same mill. If the Germans had known how many people was in that building, they definitely would have made a great effort to get it. But they did try, but I don't think they knew what was in it. And my orders was to push B Company out one door on the side the Germans were on at daylight the next morning. Well, at daylight the next morning, everything was going on. There was prisoners coming in, there was people shooting at us, we were shooting at people, and I just couldn't get organized. And long about, I guess, maybe around 9:30, we did get organized, and we went out the door. I sent one platoon out, and I followed them, and then there was two platoons to follow me, of course. And I got about 50 yards out of the building and got a hole in my right leg, and I hit the ground like a ton of lead, and there was people all around me that got hit by the same shell. But I was very fortunate. I just had a flesh wound in my right leg, but I couldn't go any further, so probably one of the maybe lucky things that happened to me, because I spent the next 3 or 4 weeks in a hospital when these other guys were out there doing all of the miserable things you've heard about Herlisheim. And you will undoubtedly have talked to some of those people, or will. And it was anything in the world but good. And I came back to the A Company about the 1st of March, or it'd been in late February. It wouldn't have been the 1st of March yet. And several of the sergeants had been commissioned, had received battlefield commissions. And there's another first lieutenant in the company. And it sort of looked like I was spare parts. And although I did have priority, but the battalion commander called me one day, there's Colonel Norton, and he said, "Vandy, I got a company that they can't take away from you this time." I said, "Well, where is it? Which one?" He says, "It's back at the 2nd Replacement Depot." And so I couldn't figure out what he was talking about, so he explained it to me. That through some arrangements, at that time we referred to as black soldiers, had volunteered for frontline duty. And there was a company of them back there that was waiting to be picked up. And I was to take myself, and we had a excess first sergeant in the battalion named Richardson. I took him, and then a company clerk, and I had my choice of any lieutenant in the battalion that I wanted to take with me. I need one more lieutenant. So I chose a Lieutenant Lacey, who was a battlefield commission, but he'd been in A Company all the time with me, and I knew him real well, and he was one heck of a guy, so I took him. And I go back, and there was approximately 180 of these black volunteers. And the mess sergeant had stripes, and a sergeant by the name of Carter, Eddie Carter. Now, you've probably heard of him. And he had stripes, and all the rest of those people were privates. They had taken busts or this or that or the other to volunteer for frontline duty, and everyone were volunteers. Nobody got forced into it. Now, with that group, I had one lieutenant. I took one. So I had 1, 2, 3, 4. I had 4 white lieutenants and 4 white platoon sergeants that were all people with battlefield experience out of somewhere in the 7th Army. And one of the people that's already been interviewed down at Abilene last fall was a Lieutenant Blair. And he was the senior one of the group. So I made him my executive officer, and then these other lieutenants were platoon leaders, of course, and we went back. They give us trucks. They were supposed to give us half tracks, like the rest of the armored infantry companies had, but they gave us regular old 6x trucks, and we motored back to the area. And I had approximately, it was over a week and less than 2 weeks to train before, organize the squads and the platoons and all that stuff. And then we'd go out to an abandoned village, and we'd practice house-to-house combat and stuff like that. Excuse me. And then we got fairly well organized, and one of the things that I remember real well, when I first got back to the battalion area, we got the word to line these people up that the battalion commander wanted to talk to them, which was a good idea. And so Colonel Norton comes up, and we got these people all bunched up where he can talk to them. And he said, basically what he said was, "You people have all volunteered for combat, and I'm going to make real sure that you get it." Turned around and walked off. And I'll never forget it. But he was one of the real good people that we had around. Colonel Norton was, and he treated that company just like he did the rest of them. And our first combat was at Spire. That is, we had taken off from Trier to the Rhine River, which you've probably heard a good bit about. And they didn't commit us on that. We had security jobs here and there, but all the way to the river, we were not committed as a company. But then when we got to the river, we were to go down, that's up the river, to Spire, and we were going after a bridge, and there was 2 company of tanks, and I loaded this company, what is normally referred to as D Company of the 56th. We loaded up on the backs of the M4 tanks, and away we went. And of course the idea there is that you ride that tank until you get shot at, and then you bail out and do your infantry work. The tank does their tank work. And it's a team job where one protects the other one and works the advancement. But it turned out fairly well. Before it was over, the other companies in the battalion were involved. It turned out to be a pretty good skirmish, and we lost a few men that day. We lost at least one lieutenant out of A Company, and that is KIAs. And of course, a lot of people got wounded, but there was also 2 or 3 of the black soldiers got killed that day, and several wounded. And this Sergeant Carter, I got to talk about him a little bit. He did get the Congressional Medal of Honor this last January, or his oldest son received it for him. Carter's been dead since '63, I think, or something like that. But Carter was one of these people that I don't care who, where, or when you meet him, he attracts you. He was a guy that he was a magnet. That's all there was to it. And I had the opportunity to talk to him on more than one occasion during those first 2 weeks, or week and a half, whatever it was. And he was a very intelligent person, and he had more military experience than most people would expect. And I'm sure you've heard this story. He was born in India, I think, and his mother was from India, and his father was from the States, and I'm not real sure just how that worked out, but he got into the Chinese army some way. I'd never have figured that out, and at least that's the story. And then he got into some brush fire wars in India when he was just a teenager. Then the Spanish Revolution come along, and he goes to Spain and gets in the Spanish Revolution. And then when the World War II starts, he's in the States, and he joins the Army. And at that time, the black soldiers had a heck of a time getting it. There were not a lot of black soldiers in combat units. There just weren't. That's just the way the place was organized. That's all. There's no use me trying to explain my ideas on it, but the whole thing, that was it. They were mostly engineers, quartermasters, truck drivers, things like that. And these people that I got, most of them had been truck drivers. And so we went through Spire, then we got across the river. And Carter was wounded at Spire too, along with everything else he did there. And of course, one of the funny stories, and not real funny either, is they sent him to the well, of course, as soon as you find out a guy's hurt, you just give him to the medics, and all you do is count your losses and keep going. And about 2 weeks later, Carter shows up at the company. And I didn't think anything about it. About 2 days after that, we get a message of some kind from the hospital, Carter's AWOL. So we sent a message back and got it straightened out. So Carter could be entered from hospital to duty again, but not many people would just go AWOL to go back to combat, but he did. But another interesting part of that company, there were a lot of good men in that company. I mean, people that well, every one of them were sincere about volunteering, but there were a lot of good people. Then one of the things that really turned out good was we had 2 Pullman cooks. And we ate. I mean, we had Sunday dinner every day that they could get to us. It was the best food I ever ate in the field. They would bake hot rolls in those field kitchens that there's not a hotel in town that could do it any better. And of course, what went with it was sometimes limited. We always had plenty of butter, and then the only thing we had other than that, we always had orange marmalade, tons of it. So we had hot rolls, butter, and orange marmalade, and I never will forget that day that after things were settled down in Spire just before dark, Lieutenant Blair, the guy I mentioned before, he was my exec, and he was taking care of the kitchens and the vehicles and all that stuff. And he shows up with a Jeep and a trailer, and he's got hot rolls and coffee and butter and orange marmalade. And those were, oh man, that was good. Of course, we hadn't had anything to eat since sometime early in the morning. That was probably a can of beans, I don't know. But then sometime about the 1st of April, the company commander of A Company was killed. So I was sent back to A Company, and Lieutenant Blair took over the colored company. And he did very well with it. And I finished out the war in A Company, and he finished out the war in D Company. And it was, I guess I think I was privileged to be in on some of the first integration of the military. As far as I know, that was the beginning. Then I was, along with several other people, after the end of the war, I'd say probably in June. The war was over in May, probably late June. There were several of us transferred to the 1st Armored Division, which had been shipped up out of Italy into Germany. And it looked like they were gathering a bunch of low point people to go to Japan. Now, that's what it looked like. And then bingo, Japan surrenders, and we start shipping home like everybody else. And I got home, and the young lady that I had been corresponding with and see a few times before we went overseas, she and I decided we ought to get married, and we did. And in that same period of time, I was given a deadline on when I could volunteer to stay in or get out. And I looked around my hometown, and I found the best job I could find was working in a sawmill for $1 a day. And heck, I was a captain in the Army, and I was making almost $400 a month. So I stayed. And I have no regrets other than they snuck Korea in on me. I had to go over there. And I guess I ought to dwell on that a little bit as far as my personal history is concerned. But to begin with, we were married in November, and the next September I was shipped to the Philippine Islands, stayed there 2 years, and while I was over there, had a Philippine Scout Service Company. And then I came back to the States, and I was assigned to Detroit, Michigan for a National Guard advisor job, and stayed there 2 years. And then Korea came along, and it would have been in September of '50. They shipped me to Korea. And the day I got my orders in Detroit, my youngest boy was 4 days old. That was a bit of a problem. So we had to move my wife and 3 boys at that time. He was 4 days old, and then next one would have been about 2.5, and the next one about 4.5. But I had to get them back to the Chicago area where she was originally from. And I went to Korea. Over there I was assigned to the Korean Military Advisory Group. So I spent Korea with the Koreans. And that was quite an experience. I learned to eat things that I would have swore I would never touch. And then I came back from there and I went to Camp Breckenridge, Kentucky, a training. I made major while I was in Korea. I made captain right at the end of the war, major in Korea. Came back to the States and went to this training area and helped train recruits. I had a heavy weapons section there for about 1.5 years, and then I went to school at Fort Benning to the Advanced Officers Course. Then I went out of there to Fort Knox, Kentucky, and we had a training center for a while, and then we reorganized the 3rd Armored Division, and in preparation to going back to Germany, which was good news. They really liked the idea, and they tried an experiment with us. They, instead of shipping the soldiers and then the families and this and the cars and this and that and the other, they organized what they call a Operation Gyroscope, and they shipped us all at once. Cats, kids, cars, whatever. Everything went on one ship, and away we went. My wife and I and my 3 boys at the time were we were in 2 staterooms, and we went to Germany, and then we spent almost 3 years near Gelnhausen, Germany, which is up near Frankfurt. And we were next door to the Russians, and our mission there was to try to stop them if they did come. And they didn't, thank goodness, because I don't know. We would have had a reasonable combat force, but I don't know what in the world we'd done with all the kids and stuff like that. I just dread to think what would have happened. But we had a foot locker in the basement of the building that was filled with this and that and the other, and the car always had a foot locker in the trunk with this and that and the other in it and stuff. So kept a gas tank full all the time, and my wife could drive real good, and they were supposed to form a convoy and go to southern France, but that never happened. Then I was promoted to lieutenant colonel while I was there in Germany, and came back to the States and spent my last 2 years at Fort Leonard Wood, which was not too far from my home. And it was actually a training center work there. I had a training battalion for about 1.5 years, and then the last 6 months, they put me out to pasture, and I was the inspector general at Fort Leonard Wood for the last 6 months. I got that job. I said, I've been cussing these people all my life. I hated them. I didn't want to see them. And one of my good friends, a guy named Carl Green, had the job, and he told me, he says, I'm going to get you that job when I leave. He was retiring. And he says, you're going to retire in 6 months, and says, well, you might as well be up there. I said, Carl, there ain't no way I can do that. He said, there's nothing to it. And really, he was right. There wasn't anything to it. I got up there, and I had 2 majors that had been there for 2 years. I had 4 or 5 sergeants that had been there a long time. I had 1 civilian helper that had been there 16 years. I had a desk that all I had to do was sit behind it and talk to the telephone when somebody called me. And then I reported directly to the chief of staff, and that was really something. Then I retired in the first day of January 1961. And that was the end of my military career.
When you were in World War II, when did you realize that y'all were going to win the war? Or when did it come together?
I got to give you a couple of opinions here that you can take them for what they're worth. But since it's all over, I am convinced that we were trained that we were never going to do anything but win the war. And I will add a little bit to that. I think you can take any group of young people, men, women, whatever, in their, say, 17 to 23 or 25 years old. You can put them in a semi-sequestered situation and you can teach them anything. And I was one of them. Now, if you get into a prison camp and they do that to you, you're getting brainwashed. If you're in your own outfit getting that done to you, you're getting motivated. Now that's a little bit sarcastic maybe, but that's it. And I'll add a little bit to that is not anything to brag about. But when I went to Germany, obviously I would have been 25 years old, and I had been training for 4 years. I didn't think there was a German worth keeping. Now that was in my head. There was absolutely no qualms about doing what we did. None. Not one bit. The only thing that might get to you once in a while was your own people when things went bad. And then we were taught, and I don't think I ever lost control. Of course, that's my opinion. That if somebody was killed or hurt, you turn it over to the proper people and you keep going. And that was drummed into our heads. And no, we never had the slightest notion we wasn't going to win it. Never. Even when, in the days when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor and Hitler was taking Europe and stuff like that, I don't think anyone ever had the idea that when we were going, that there would be anything different than what it was.
Did you have any experience liberating like the death camps, or were you aware of the atrocities at the time?
When we got to Landsberg, I was back in A Company. We got to Landsberg, the first thing I saw was the labor camps. And these people were in the strapped clothes. And under bad circumstances. It was bad. The living conditions were bad. But some unit, wasn't my company, but some unit got to these labor camps before I did, and they just threw the gates open and let these people out, and they went their way. And then later that day, I heard about the death camp there just out of Landsberg. I can't think of the name of it now. Dachau. I heard about Dachau, and me and my first sergeant, I think it was, jumped in the Jeep and went out there. And lady, it's unexplainable. I'm sure you've seen pictures, and you saw what we saw. And you just can't believe that this would happen. And I have done some studying on that since, trying to get it through my head what was going on. And there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that this was all planned. The buildings were built for that purpose. The labor camp buildings were built for that purpose. And these gas chambers and these incinerators were built for that purpose. And they were used for that purpose. Now, how anyone can do that, I don't know. I can't explain that. But there's no doubt that this plan was put into effect way back before we even knew it was going on. And I didn't see it again. I was close to it again. But I didn't want to go back out there. There was other people I know there was people out there looking after it. And these people what really got to you was these poor people that were absolutely dying and they weren't dead yet. And that got to me. The dead ones, well, nothing you can do. But here was people out there that they couldn't even drink orange juice without it just come right back up. And some of them they saved, some of them they didn't. But that was terrible. Now, what I started to say, after we got down at the foot of the Alps, is actually 2 days before the war was officially over. We knew it was over, but it hadn't been declared yet. They sent me and my company back to Landsberg. And it had nothing to do with the labor camps or Dachau, either one. But up on a hillside where nobody had noticed, there was a prison, a federal prison, German federal prison, and it contained hardcore criminals, it contained political prisoners, it had prisoners of war, it had everything in it with the German guards. And I forget who it was, explained to me, when you get there, you take over that prison and don't turn anybody loose. Don't let anybody turn anybody loose, because some of those people are hardcore criminals. And we don't know which is which right now. Sooner or later, a military government team will come in and take over and weed them out. So we had a real nice 2 or 3 weeks there, and all we did was just... it took about 1 platoon each day, and so that meant a guy could work 1 day and had 3 days off. And we took care of that prison, and it was a rather sad situation, but my orders was don't turn anybody loose, because somebody come in and throw them gates open, you're just turning hardcore criminals loose. Plus, there's a lot of people that should have been turned loose, but who knew who was what? But that was quite an experience too, to take over a prison. When you wasn't, but the guys in the company thought it was great. You know, nobody's shooting at them. They take their steel helmets off and just wear their helmet liners, and eat 3 hot meals a day, and they were real happy. And while we were there, we found a real good wine cellar and stuff like that. One other little story about that same deal is there was I think it was the French 1st Armored Division was down in the same area. And the word got out that we had found this wine cellar, and it had many, many, many gallons of wine in it. It was big. And this French lieutenant shows up, and he spoke pretty good English, and he found out that I was the commanding officer of the company, and he said that he heard that we had found a wine cellar, and he wanted to know where it was. And I played stupid. I don't know what you're talking about, stuff like that. He said, now, I know you know what it is. Some of my kids and boys had undoubtedly talked to him, or he got to him. And after a bit of discussion, he finally told me that, says, you Americans can drink water, we have to have wine. I told him to get lost. Out of here, boy. He didn't appreciate it, but I wasn't about to give him our wine. Oh, anything else?
Well, how did you being in the war affect, you said that you got married after you got out. How did it affect your girlfriend at the time?
We both knew that we didn't want to get married while the war was going on. We had just a mutual joke between the two of us that one war at a time was enough. So he's married, he knows what I'm talking about. But we had agreed on that before I went overseas, that that was no time to get, as far as we were concerned. Now, a lot of people did, and that's all right. I couldn't criticize anybody, because people, they get in love and they get married, that's fine. But we didn't want to do it because there's always the opportunity that I wouldn't come back, or come back in bad shape or something like that. That was just a reality that you had to face. And then when I did come home, well, no time waiting any longer. But it was a bit of a hardship when I did go to Korea. We had 3 boys in. The little one was a tiny baby. And something I could add there too, there's a big difference when you got a family at home, your own kids, and when you don't. Now, when I was over in Germany there in World War II, that is before World War II was over, of course I had a dad and mother, and I had a brother and 2 sisters, but that's not like your own kids. And when I was in Korea, I did a good bit of fretting about my wife and 3 kids. It made a difference. And just to think about that they might have to put up without me for a while. But during World War II, I didn't have to worry about that, and I'm glad I did it that way, really. And my wife agreed with me at the time.
Obviously, the war has affected you. How would you say it's affected your life overall?
Well, you mean the war itself?
The war itself.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that much. Getting ready for it undoubtedly instilled a great deal of discipline into me personally. I could tolerate things that I probably wouldn't have otherwise. I learned a lot about human nature working with lots of people, and lots of different people too, because during those training periods, I have no idea how many different people came and went. And you had to get acquainted with each one of them and work with them, and then they're gone and there's a new one, and things like that. That was just normal. And if I hadn't have been in the service during the war, I probably wouldn't have met 1% of that many people. Maybe not that much. But you learn to meet people, and you learn to do what your boss wanted, and you learn to try to get the guys under you to do what that you wanted, and hope you did the right thing. But it definitely had an impact on my life. It's kind of hard to say everything that it might have been. I don't know. I've been blessed with good health most of the time. Last few years, I'm not as active as I was up to, somewhere around 70, you change courses. But I think I learned a lot of good habits. This bit of living a sanitary life, whether you're in a building or in a house or in the field or wherever, I think probably helped a lot of people to live a more healthy life. It probably did. In my case, I'm sure it did. And you learn to take care of yourself. There was times that they were teaching us to live on 1 canteen of water a day, and that include water to wash your socks, and which is that's partially a joke. But that's what we used to say. You get 1 canteen of water a day, and that's where you wash your socks and part of that. And now they don't do that anymore. They don't cut you down on water. They give you all the water you can drink, or try to. Because they found out that if you cut down on water, you cut down on a lot of other things. your vitality drops off real quick. You get dehydrated and everything goes down. But all in all, I have no regrets about my military service. Of course, I'm retired now with what is a decent pension. And I worked for 20 years after I got out. I didn't have much choice. I had 4 kids in grade school. Well, we had a daughter in Germany while we were there. And so we got 1 kid with a German birth certificate. You never get 2. You only get 1 birth certificate. You don't make it where you're born. That's where you get it. And then we found out that the State Department said that she was an American citizen. Didn't have to worry about it. Then we get ready to come home, and the Judicial Department says she is not American citizen. And they have the last word. So you got to go through a whole rigmarole of stuff, and she's not naturalized, but she gets a certificate of citizenship. And it took us a while to get that. Finally, a federal judge in Joplin, Missouri finally got it for us after we were retired. But every once in a while somebody wants to see her birth certificate, and she pulls that out thing and nobody can read it. But it was quite an experience. That's about all I can think of.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Glad I got her done. I didn't think